I was standing outside the restaurant with a bouquet of grocery store tulips wilting in my fist, watching the hostess check her list for the third time, when a hand slid into mine, warm and sure, fingers lacing through mine like we'd done it 1,000 times before. "Table for two," said a voice I recognized instantly, and my brain simply stopped working. Not stalled, not stuttered, stopped, the way a laptop freezes when you ask it to do one thing too many. Because the hand belonged to Nora Bellamy, the woman who sat 4 desks away from me at work, who had never once touched me on purpose, who was currently smiling at the hostess like we were the most normal couple in Portland, and whose thumb was now stroking slow circles over my knuckles like she could feel exactly how fast my pulse had started sprinting. "Don't do anything weird," I told myself. "Don't say her name like a question. Don't look down at the tulips like you forgot you were holding a small, dying apology to a woman who never showed up." I looked down at the tulips. "Right this way," the hostess said, either not noticing or too professional to comment on the fact that 30 seconds earlier I had been alone on the sidewalk checking my phone for the 4th time in 10 minutes. And now I had a date holding my hand and steering me through the door like she owned the place. "My name is Dean Foster. I was 28 then, a project coordinator at a mid-size branding agency in downtown Portland, which meant I spent my days translating what clients actually wanted into language their own marketing directors could understand without crying. Nora worked 2 departments over, in strategy, the kind of job where she got invited into rooms I only heard about secondhand. We'd worked in the same building for a year and a half. We'd shared an elevator maybe 200 times. We'd exchanged exactly enough small talk to be friendly and exactly not enough to be friends, which is its own particular kind of tragedy when you've spent that entire year and a half quietly, stupidly, thoroughly interested in someone who barely knew your coffee order. Nora Bellamy had a laugh that carried across open floor plans and made people 2 rows over smile without knowing why. She wore blazers like they were daring her to be taken less seriously, and cardigans on Fridays that made the blazers look like a costume she took off the second she could. She had a habit of chewing the cap of her pen when she was thinking hard, and once, in a meeting I wasn't even supposed to be in, she looked directly at me across the table and mouthed, "Save me," while our creative director explained, for the 3rd time, what a mood board was. I had not saved her. I had, however, thought about that exact moment more times than any well-adjusted man should admit. So when she appeared out of nowhere on a sidewalk outside Corvina, took my hand like it belonged to her, and told a hostess we needed a table for 2, my first genuine thought was that I had finally lost my mind from the humiliation of being stood up, and my second thought, arriving about 4 seconds later and considerably louder, was that I did not care. "You looked like you needed rescuing," Nora said under her breath as the hostess led us through the dining room, past tables of people who had clearly had a much less complicated Thursday than I was having. "Also, I'm starving, and I already had a reservation under my name that I don't intend to waste." "You had a reservation." "For one, I was going to eat alone and pretend I liked it." She glanced sideways at me, hazel eyes catching the low restaurant light. "Then I saw you standing outside looking like a man whose date had just texted him a very long paragraph that started with so." I winced. "It started with so. They always start with so." She squeezed my hand once, then let go as we reached our table, and I felt the loss of it more than I wanted to admit to myself, standing there holding tulips like an idiot in a rom-com he hadn't auditioned for. "Sit down, Dean. You look pale. Order wine." I sat. I ordered wine. I set the tulips on the empty chair beside me because I genuinely did not know what else to do with them, and Nora looked at the tulips, looked at me, and said, very seriously, "Are those for her or for me?" They were for her. Rude. But she was smiling, that unfair, unhurried smile that had been quietly wrecking my composure since roughly month 3 of knowing her. "I expect flowers of my own if I'm going to keep saving your evenings. You've saved one evening. One very dramatic evening. That's basically a full season of television." She unfolded her napkin with the crisp efficiency of someone who had grown up being told to sit up straight at dinner, and looked at me properly for the first time since we'd walked in, the joke draining out of her expression just enough to be replaced by something quieter. Seriously, though, are you okay? I thought about lying. I thought about the version of me that would say fine, totally fine. Standing outside a restaurant alone on a Thursday night is basically a hobby of mine at this point. Instead, I heard myself say, a little embarrassed, mostly relieved. She wasn't cruel about it. She just realized halfway through getting ready that she didn't want to, and she was honest enough to tell me instead of just not showing up. That's almost admirable. It's very almost. Nora laughed, and there it was, the sound that turned heads 2 tables over, warm and a little too loud for a restaurant with candles this small, and I felt my shoulders come down from somewhere near my ears for the first time since I'd checked my phone the 4th time. Well, she said, picking up the menu, her loss is my dinner. What's good here? I don't actually know. I picked it off a list because it looked romantic in the photos. Very reassuring. I'm now questioning your entire judgment as a human being. You held my hand and lied to a hostess for me 10 minutes ago. Your judgment isn't exactly airtight either. Something flickered across her face, quick, almost nervous, gone before I could name it. Fair, she said, and looked back down at the menu a beat too long for someone who'd claimed to be starving. We ordered. She got the branzino because she said she liked ordering things she couldn't pronounce with confidence, which made the waiter smile despite himself. I got a pasta dish that turned out to be the best decision I'd made all week, possibly all month, possibly since I'd accepted the terrible date that had led me here in the first place. Somewhere between the breadbasket and the first course, the conversation stopped being about my humiliating Thursday and started being about everything else, the way conversations do when 2 people have spent a year and a half being polite in an elevator and are suddenly given 90 uninterrupted minutes to be something more than that. So how long have you known Priya from accounts? Nora asked, twirling her wine glass. I saw you 2 laughing by the printer last week and got weirdly jealous, which I am now telling you completely on purpose because apparently I have no filter tonight. I raised an eyebrow. Jealous? Don't make it weird. You made it weird. I contain multitudes. She took a sip of wine, unbothered, like she hadn't just handed me a piece of information I intended to examine from every angle for the rest of my natural life. Priya, answer the question. She's engaged to my college roommate. We talk about football. That's the entire relationship. Oh, Nora set her glass down with more care than the moment strictly required. Well, good. Not that it matters. I was just making conversation. You were interrogating me. I was making pointed, targeted conversation. She smiled into her wine. There's a difference. Is there? There is if I say there is. She looked up, and for a second the restaurant noise seemed to fall away, the way it apparently does in every good story right before someone says something they've been holding on to. Can I tell you something a little embarrassing? You held my hand and claimed me at a hostess stand 20 minutes ago. I think the embarrassing bar has been thoroughly cleared for the evening. Fair point. She turned her wine glass by the stem, not quite meeting my eyes. I've had a reservation here for weeks. Alone. Every few weeks I come here by myself, order the branzino, and pretend it's self-care and not just me avoiding my apartment because my roommate's boyfriend basically lives there now and I'm tired of being the third wheel in my own kitchen. She exhaled. Tonight I walked up, saw you standing there with flowers looking like someone had personally reached into your chest and rearranged your organs, and I don't know. I just wanted to fix it. That's not normal restaurant behavior. I'm aware. It's very not normal restaurant behavior. You're supposed to be flattered, not clinical about it. I'm extremely flattered. I'm just also trying not to combust, so I'm being clinical to buy myself time. That got the laugh out of her again, quieter this time, more private, like it was meant only for our table. Okay, she said. Clinical is allowed. We talked for 2 hours after that. Not work talk, not the kind of small talk that fills elevators and hallway crossings, but the real kind. The kind where you learn someone grew up the youngest of 4 and spent her whole childhood being handed things secondhand and swore she'd never settle for anything that felt like leftovers again. The kind where I told her about the year my dad was between jobs and I learned to cook because someone had to, and she listened like it mattered, actually mattered, not like she was waiting for her turn to talk. She had strong, occasionally unhinged opinions about which of our coworkers would survive a zombie apocalypse, ranked our creative director dead last, and made me laugh so hard at one point that the couple next to us glanced over, visibly hoping we would be quieter and visibly resigned to the fact that we would not. By the time the check came, I had entirely stopped thinking about the woman who never showed up. I had, in fact, mostly stopped thinking, in the way you do when you're paying more attention to someone's mouth moving than the actual words coming out of it, which is a dangerous habit I would need to work on if I intended to survive being anywhere near Nora Bellamy on a semi-regular basis. I should probably confess, she said, sliding her card toward the waiter before I could reach for mine, that I don't usually rescue strangers off sidewalks. This was new territory for me. I'm honored to be your first. Don't get used to it. I have a reputation to protect. She glanced at me, and the joke softened at the edges. Although I wouldn't be entirely opposed to a repeat performance. Hypothetically, purely hypothetically, outside. The night had gone cool and a little foggy, the kind of Portland evening where the streetlights get a soft halo around them and everything looks slightly more cinematic than it has any right to. Nora pulled her coat tighter and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between amused and nervous, which on her looked almost the same thing. So she said, "This was either a very strange coincidence or the best thing that's happened to either of us in months. I'm going to go with both." Diplomatic answer. She rocked back on her heels. "Do you want to walk me to my car?" "Purely for safety reasons. This neighborhood is dangerous. Full of overly emotional men holding dying tulips. Extremely dangerous. You're lucky I'm here." We walked 3 blocks in comfortable quiet, the kind that only shows up once you've already spent a whole dinner proving you can fill silence when you want to and don't need to prove it constantly. At her car, she turned to face me, keys already in hand, and there was a pause. One of those small charged pauses that either turns into something or gets laughed away and filed under almost. "I had a really good time," she said, which is a stupid thing to say to a man I basically kidnapped from his own disastrous date, but it's true. I had a good time too. A genuinely excellent time, actually, considering how it started. See, that's the part that's bothering me. She tilted her head, studying me with the kind of focus she probably brought to strategy decks, the kind that made junior staff nervous and made me, apparently, want to hand her every unguarded thing I had. "I've worked 40 feet from you for a year and a half, Dean. I've watched you eat the same sad desk lunch every single day. I have never once thought about asking you to dinner. And then tonight I saw you standing there, and it was like something just clicked into place, loud enough that I couldn't ignore it. I don't know what to do with that information. I could offer some ideas." "Please don't. I'm trying to be a mature professional adult about this. You held my hand in front of a hostess 20 minutes after meeting me on a sidewalk. I don't think mature professional adult is currently on the table." She laughed, that same unguarded sound, and reached out to fix the collar of my jacket, which did not need fixing, an excuse to touch me one more time before she had to get in her car and drive away and turn back into the woman 4 desks down who chewed her pen cap in meetings and mouthed "save me" across conference tables. "Give me your phone," she said. I handed it over. She typed something in, handed it back, and there it was, her name and number sitting in my contacts under, I would discover later, Nora Table for 2, because apparently she had decided the nickname on the spot and was not interested in revising it. "Text me," she said. "Tomorrow. Not tonight, because tonight I want to go home and think about this without a phone buzzing and ruining the moment." That's oddly specific. I contain multitudes, Dean. We've been over this. She got in her car. I stood on the sidewalk, holding my dying tulips, watching her taillights disappear around the corner, and felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt in longer than I wanted to admit. Something that had absolutely nothing to do with the woman who never showed up, and everything to do with the one who had. I texted her the next morning at 9 sharp, The second I judged it acceptable without looking desperate. I typed, "For the record, the tulips survived the night. They're currently sitting on my kitchen counter, extremely confused about why they were rejected by the wrong woman." She replied within 4 minutes, which I noted and did not examine too closely, though I absolutely examined it closely, for minutes, not immediate enough to look like she'd been staring at her phone, not delayed enough to look like she was playing games. "Tell them I said hello," she wrote back. "And tell them, on behalf of every flower ever bought for a bad date, that they deserved better." That was how it started, not with fireworks exactly, but with something steadier than fireworks, the kind of beginning that felt less like a spark and more like a fire that had been quietly building under a pile of dry wood for a year and a half, without either of us noticing. Monday morning at the office was its own particular kind of chaos. I walked in expecting nothing, or at least telling myself I expected nothing, and found a sticky note stuck to my monitor in handwriting I recognized instantly from the check she'd signed at the restaurant, tight and slanted and slightly too confident for its own good. It said, "Table for two again sometime. Ask nicely, and I might even let you pick the place this time." I peeled it off, folded it once, and put it in my desk drawer before anyone could see me grinning at a piece of paper like a lunatic. The second date happened 4 days later, and it was Nora's idea, which she made very clear when she stopped by my desk on Monday morning holding 2 coffees and set one down in front of me without asking if I wanted it. Friday, she said, "I'm picking the place this time, since you clearly can't be trusted to choose anywhere better than looked romantic in the photos." That's harsh. It worked out fine. It worked out fine because I happened to walk by at the exact right moment. That's not a system, Dean. That's luck. I refuse to build a relationship on luck. What do you want to build it on? She considered the question with more seriousness than I expected from a woman holding 2 paper coffee cups in a hallway. "Good decisions," she said finally. Repeated once, consistently, over time, until neither of us has to wonder anymore. I thought about that sentence for the rest of the day, replaying it during a client call I only half paid attention to. Turning it over the way you turn over something you suspect might be important long before you're ready to admit how important. Friday came, and Nora picked a place that turned out to be a tiny Vietnamese restaurant tucked behind a laundromat. No sign out front except a string of paper lanterns, the kind of place you'd only know about if someone told you, or if you'd grown up 2 blocks away, which, it turned out, she had. "My dad used to bring us here on report card days," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Straight A's got you the crab noodles. Anything less, and you got the plain broth and a lecture about effort. Brutal. Effective. I got very good grades." She unwrapped her chopsticks with practiced efficiency. "Also mildly food-motivated for the rest of my life. But we don't need to unpack that tonight." We talked for 3 hours that time, longer than the first dinner, longer than either of us seemed to notice, until the owner started stacking chairs around us with the pointed patience of a man who liked us but also wanted to go home. She told me about her sisters, 3 of them, all older, all convinced they knew better, and how she'd spent her whole childhood being handed hand-me-down opinions along with hand-me-down clothes until she'd made a private decision somewhere around age 14 that she was going to have opinions of her own, even if it meant being loud about them. I told her about the year my parents almost split up and didn't, and how that year had taught me to read a room before I ever said anything true in it, a habit I was apparently still working on. "You're doing it right now," she said, watching me. "Reading the room before you say something true. Am I? You get this look. Very slight furrow, right here." She reached across the table and pressed one finger gently between my eyebrows. "It's cute, for the record. Also slightly exhausting to watch, because I want to know what you're actually thinking, not the pre-approved version. What if the pre-approved version is safer?" Safer for who? I didn't have an answer for that one either, not a quick one, and she let the silence sit there instead of filling it, which surprised me more than anything else she'd done that night. Most people rushed to smooth over a pause like that. Nora just watched me, patient, unbothered, like she had all the time in the world to wait for me to catch up to whatever she'd already figured out. Ask me something you actually want to know, she said eventually. Not small talk. Something real. I thought about it. Why me? Genuinely. You could have anyone in that office, probably anyone in this city, and you picked the guy standing alone on a sidewalk holding dying flowers for someone else. Her expression softened, the sharp edges she wore like armor, most of the time going quiet for a second. Because you didn't perform it, she said. The humiliation. Most people, standing there stood up. They'd have been on their phone pretending to be busy, pretending it didn't matter, doing the whole show for anyone watching. You were just standing there. Sad. Honest about it. I don't know. It got me. That's either the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me or deeply concerning. Both. I contain multitudes. Word got around the office the way it always does, which is to say slowly at first and then all at once. Priya from accounts noticed we'd started walking to the coffee shop together most mornings and made exactly one comment, raised eyebrow and everything, before I told her to mind her own football-loving business. Our creative director, a man named Callum who ran meetings like he was auditioning for a TED Talk, noticed nothing at all for approximately 3 weeks, which tracked, because Callum had once referred to the intern as the new guy for 4 months after she'd been promoted twice. It was Bex, the office manager, who finally cornered me by the printer with the subtlety of a woman who had absolutely no interest in subtlety. You and Bellamy, she said, not a question. Me and Bellamy what? Don't do that. I've worked in offices for 11 years. I can smell a workplace romance from the parking garage. She crossed her arms, delighted with herself. You've both been smiling more. She stopped eating lunch at her desk. You started ironing your shirts. Something's happening. I've always ironed my shirts. Dean. Sweetie. No, you haven't. I gave up denying it around week 5, mostly because Nora gave up denying it first, walking straight up to my desk during a Tuesday lull and perching on the edge of it like she owned real estate there, which by that point she basically did. I'm tired of being subtle, she announced, loud enough for the 3 closest desks to hear. I like you. You like me. We've been going to dinner twice a week for a month and calling it coincidence. I'd like to stop pretending, please. The entire row went quiet in that specific office way where everyone is very obviously listening while very obviously pretending to type. Okay, I said. Consider it stopped. Good. She looked immensely satisfied, glanced around at our very obviously eavesdropping coworkers, and added, at full volume, for anyone taking notes, yes, we're dating. No, it's not going to affect our work. And yes, Bex, you win the office pool. I heard about the office pool. Bex, 3 desks away, pumped one fist without looking up from her monitor. There was, of course, an HR conversation, the kind that exists in every office romance story, because apparently no company on earth has figured out how to skip it. A woman named Diane sat us both down separately, then together, and walked through a disclosure form with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. Since Nora and I worked in different departments with no direct reporting relationship, it amounted to little more than paperwork and a mildly awkward conversation about maintaining professionalism, which we both agreed to with straight faces and then immediately broke by making eye contact and losing it the second we left Diane's office. That was the least romantic paperwork I've ever filled out, Nora said, walking back to her desk. You wrote C attached next to the box that asked how the relationship began. Because I stole him off a sidewalk from a woman who stood him up felt like a lot for a government form. It's not a government form. It's an internal HR document. Same energy. 3 weeks after the HR paperwork, Nora's ex-boyfriend showed up at a company happy hour he had absolutely no reason to be at, tagging along with a friend from another department like it was the most casual thing in the world. His name was Grant, and he had the particular confidence of a man who had once had something good and still hadn't fully processed losing it, which made him either harmless or exhausting depending on how much he'd had to drink. That night, it was the second one. Nora Bellamy, he said, sliding up beside her at the bar with a grin that probably used to work on her, once, a long time ago. Look at you. Corporate strategy. I always said you'd end up running something. Grant. Her voice went flat in a way I'd never heard it go. All the warmth drained out like someone had pulled a plug. What are you doing here? Came with Marcus. Didn't know you'd be here. His eyes slid to me, then back to her, then to the small but obvious distance I was not, in fact, keeping. Didn't know you were seeing someone either. I am. She reached back without looking and found my hand, lacing her fingers through mine with the same certainty she'd used that first night outside the restaurant. A gesture that had by now become so familiar it barely registered until I felt her grip tighten, just slightly. A fraction, the kind of pressure that says more than words do. Dean, this is Grant. Grant, Dean. Nice to meet you, I said, and meant it in the specific, careful way you mean things when you're deciding in real time not to let a stranger's presence rattle you. Grant nodded, sizing me up with the particular thoroughness of a man doing quiet math he didn't like the answer to. You two work together? We do. That's cute. Something in his tone made the word land wrong. Not quite an insult. Not quite not one. Didn't peg you for an office romance type, nor. You used to say that was a terrible idea. Recipe for disaster, I think you called it. People change their minds, Nora said, and there was an edge to it now, sharp enough that even Grant seemed to register it. Usually when the first idea turns out to have been wrong about them all along. He didn't stay long after that, drifting back toward his friend with the deflated air of a man who'd hoped for a different reaction and gotten none of it. Nora exhaled slowly once he was out of earshot, shoulders dropping from somewhere near her ears, and I realized I'd been holding my own breath without noticing. Sorry about that, she said. I didn't know he'd be here. I would have warned you. You don't have to warn me about anything. I'm not worried about Grant. You should know the short version, at least, so it's not weird if he shows up again. She turned to face me fully, leaning against the bar. We dated for 2 years. He was fine mostly. He just never quite believed I was as good at my job as I actually am. Kept calling my ambition intense, like it was a diagnosis instead of a personality trait. I ended it about a year before I met you. Best decision I made that whole year. Honestly, besides taking that stupid table for 2 at Corvina by myself every few weeks. You don't owe me the whole history. I want you to have it anyway. She reached up and straightened my collar, an old habit of hers by then. An excuse to touch me that had stopped needing an excuse a while back. I spent 2 years with someone who made my ambition sound like a character flaw. I'm not interested in doing that again, with anyone, for any reason. I need you to know that going in. I've never once thought your ambition was a flaw. I know. That's actually the whole point, Dean. That's the entire reason I'm still here. Grant texted her twice over the following week. Vague, half-apologetic messages that read like a man testing whether a door was still open. Nora showed me both, unprompted, before she deleted them, which told me more about where things stood between us than any grand declaration could have. I don't want secrets between us, she said, thumb hovering over the delete button. Even small dumb ones like this. Especially small dumb ones like this. There was, around that same time, a coworker problem of my own, less dramatic than an ex-boyfriend showing up at happy hour but persistent in its own quiet way. A new hire named Sophia had joined my department a few weeks before Nora and I went public, sharp and funny and openly. Unmistakably interested, the kind of interested that showed up in extra questions at my desk and lingering after meetings, and one memorable Friday, where she'd asked if I wanted to grab a drink in a tone that left no ambiguity about what kind of drink she meant. I'd been vague and polite about it before Nora and I were official. The way you're vague and polite when you're interested in someone else, but haven't said so out loud yet. After we went public, Sophia backed off almost entirely, professional and pleasant, exactly as she should have been. Almost entirely wasn't quite entirely, though, and Nora noticed it before I did. The way she noticed most things before I did. She still lights up a little when you walk into the room, Nora said one evening, not accusatory, just observing, the strategist in her cataloging data the way she cataloged everything. I hadn't noticed. That's because you're not supposed to notice things like that about yourself. I'm not worried, For the record, I'm just telling you I see it, because I'd rather say it out loud than let it turn into something I'm quietly resentful about 6 months from now. Do you want me to do something about it? I want you to keep doing exactly what you're already doing, which is nothing, because you're not encouraging it, and you're clearly not interested. I just wanted you to know I notice things. Consider it a preview of the next 50 years. Terrifying. Extremely. She smiled, settling against my shoulder on the couch. Get used to it. The months that followed had the particular texture of a relationship built by two people who already knew how to work alongside each other before they knew how to love each other, which meant we skipped some of the usual awkwardness and went straight into a kind of easy familiarity most couples take years to earn. She knew, from watching me across a year and a half of meetings, that I got quiet before I got frustrated and learned to ask what was wrong before I even realized I was upset. I knew, from that same year and a half, that she chewed her pen cap when she was nervous and started talking faster when she was covering for something, and learned to slow her down with a hand on her arm before she talked herself into a spiral. We had our first real fight in October, for months in, over something that felt enormous at the time and faintly ridiculous in retrospect. A big client account, the kind that made or broke quarterly numbers, needed both our departments to collaborate on a pitch, and Nora, doing her job exactly the way she was supposed to, pushed back hard on a strategy I'd spent 3 weeks building. In the meeting, it was professional, sharp, exactly what she was paid to do. After the meeting, alone in the stairwell, it turned into something else entirely. "You made me look unprepared in front of the whole team," I said, voice tighter than I meant it to be. "I made a strategic point. That's literally my job, Dean. You could have brought it to me first." I tried. "You were in back-to-back meetings all week and told me, and I quote, 'Just send feedback whenever. I trust your read.' So I gave you my read. In the room, where the client could hear it, because that's where the decision was actually being made. I didn't have a good answer for that, and the not having one made me angrier, the useless kind of angry that comes from knowing you're wrong and not wanting to admit it yet. We didn't speak for the rest of the day, which felt unbearable in a way that surprised me, given that 6 months earlier I hadn't spoken to her most days either and had barely noticed the absence. That night, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding a paper bag from the taco place 2 blocks from my building, and stood in my doorway looking equal parts annoyed and determined. "I'm still a little mad at you," she said, "but I'm hungrier than I am mad, so we're doing this now." Doing what? Talking. Properly. Not stairwell yelling. Actual talking, with tacos as a peace offering, because I refused to go to bed angry over something this fixable. We sat on my kitchen floor, backs against the cabinets, and talked it through the way we should have in the stairwell, both of us admitting the parts we didn't want to admit. I'd been careless with the collaboration because I trusted her judgment more than I trusted my own nerve to defend the work in front of her. She'd pushed too hard in the room because some old instinct told her that being right publicly mattered more than being kind privately. A habit left over from years of having to fight twice as hard to be taken half as seriously in rooms full of men like Callum. "I don't want to be someone who makes you feel small at work," she said quietly, picking at the foil on her taco. "That's the actual worst thing I could imagine being to you. You don't. You make me want to be better at defending my own work, which is different. Better, honestly. That's a very generous read of tonight. I contain multitudes." She threw a napkin at my head, but she was smiling when she did it. And that was the night I understood, really understood, that this wasn't going to be one of those relationships that looked perfect from the outside and hollow up close. This was going to be the kind where we fought like people who actually cared about getting it right, not people performing harmony for an audience that didn't exist. Meeting her family happened over Thanksgiving, 6 months in, at a house in Salem crowded with 3 older sisters, 2 brothers-in-law, a small army of nieces and nephews, and a mother who hugged me before she'd even learned my last name. "This is Dean," Nora announced from the doorway, coat still half off, like she was daring anyone in the room to have an opinion about it. "He's the one who ironed his shirt for you people, so be nice." "I always iron my shirts," I said. You've never once ironed a shirt in your life, Nora said, without missing a beat, but I appreciate the effort of the lie. Her sisters descended on me with the particular thoroughness of women who had clearly discussed a strategy in advance, peppering me with questions disguised as small talk, watching how I answered as closely as they listened to the answers themselves. The oldest, a woman named Priscilla who apparently ran the family the way Nora ran a strategy meeting, cornered me by the dessert table sometime around the second hour. She's told us about you, Priscilla said, arms crossed. Not unfriendly, but not exactly warm either. The restaurant story. Very cinematic. Very Nora. Honestly, to do something that dramatic on a random Thursday. I got lucky. You did. She studied me for a long moment. She dated Grant for 2 years, and none of us liked him. But we never said anything because she seemed happy, or she seemed like she'd convinced herself she was happy, which isn't the same thing, and none of us wanted to be the one to point out the difference. I'm not going to make that mistake twice. So I'm telling you now, if you ever make her feel small the way he did, you'll have 4 sisters at your door before she's even finished telling us about it. Understood. Good. Her expression cracked into something warmer, unexpectedly. For what it's worth, she laughs more since you. Actual laughing, not the performance kind she does at parties. We noticed before she told us anything. Nora found me 20 minutes later, hovering near the kitchen while her nephew explained an elaborate Lego construction in more detail than any 6-year-old had any right to command. Priscilla give you the speech? She asked, sliding an arm around my waist. The 4 sisters at your door speech, yes. She gives that to everyone. Consider it a rite of passage. She rested her head against my shoulder, watching her family fill the house with noise and mismatched plates, and someone's dog underfoot the entire time. They like you, though? I can tell. Priscilla doesn't waste her dessert table interrogation on people she's already decided don't matter. Is that a compliment? Extremely high praise, actually, in Bellamy family terms. Later that night, driving back to Portland with the heater running and Nora dozing against the window, I found myself thinking about how quickly a stranger's family could start to feel like something you wanted permanently in your life. How a random Thursday outside a restaurant had unspooled into Thanksgiving dinners and sisters issuing warnings on my behalf, and a woman asleep beside me who trusted me enough to be unguarded, finally. After a year and a half of being careful around each other for no reason either of us could properly explain anymore. The notes kept coming, long after the first sticky one on my monitor. She'd leave them tucked into my laptop bag, under my keyboard, once memorably taped to the inside of a coffee cup lid, so I nearly drank it. Mine were less elegant, usually scrawled on the backs of receipts, but she kept every single one anyway, filed in a shoebox in her closet that she eventually showed me with the solemnity of someone unveiling a museum exhibit. "This is us," she said, gesturing at a box full of crumpled paper. "This is the whole relationship, documented in terrible handwriting." A year after the restaurant, almost to the day, I asked her to dinner at Corvino again. The same table if the hostess could manage it, and she raised one eyebrow when I made the request out loud, the kind of look that said she suspected something but wasn't going to ruin it by guessing. We sat down at the same corner table, and I ordered the same wine. And about halfway through her branzino, right as she was mid-sentence explaining some elaborate theory about which of our coworkers would survive a zombie apocalypse, revised for the 3rd time since the original ranking, I set down my fork. "Nora, that's my serious conversation voice. What did I do?" "Nothing. You didn't do anything." "Well, you did one thing, a year ago, right outside that window." I nodded toward the front of the restaurant, toward the exact stretch of sidewalk where she'd taken my hand and rewritten the rest of my life without asking permission first. "You took my hand and told a hostess we needed a table for 2, and I have spent every single day since then extremely grateful that you did." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Dean, I'm not proposing right now, before you panic. I just wanted you to know that. I wanted to say it out loud, in this restaurant, at this table, because I don't think I've ever properly thanked you for rescuing a man you barely knew off a sidewalk for no reason other than you didn't like the way he looked standing there alone. She set her fork down slowly, eyes bright in the candlelight. I had every reason, she said. I just didn't understand it yet. We didn't get engaged that night. Not officially, not with a ring. But something shifted at that table all the same. The quiet, unspoken agreement that this was heading somewhere permanent, that neither of us was interested in it being anything less. The actual proposal came 8 months later at the same restaurant again, because by then it had become ours in the way certain places become ours without either person deciding it on purpose. I'd arranged with the hostess in advance, the same one from that first night, now considerably more invested in our relationship than any hostess has any professional reason to be. And when Nora and I walked in, she led us not to our usual corner table, but to one near the front window, the exact spot on the sidewalk visible through the glass. "Why are we sitting here?" Nora asked, settling into her chair, immediately suspicious in the way she got whenever I planned something without telling her. "Sentimental reasons." "You hate sentimental reasons. You once called my shoebox of notes aggressively soft." "I'm allowed to grow." Dinner went the way it always did, easy and funny and full of the kind of overlapping conversation that only happens once two people have spent years learning each other's rhythms. Somewhere between the appetizer and the entree, I reached into my jacket pocket, and when she glanced down and saw the small box in my hand, she went very still, the loudest, most talkative woman I'd ever met suddenly and completely silent. "Dean, I know we've had this exact table's worth of conversation, or close to it. I just wanted to ask properly. In the place where you decided, for reasons I still don't fully understand, that I was worth rescuing." I got down on one knee right there beside the table, aware of the whole restaurant watching, aware and not caring at all. "Nora Bellamy, will you marry me?" She didn't answer with words at first. She stood up, pulled me up with her, and kissed me hard enough that the couple at the next table applauded before she'd even said yes, which she did a few seconds later, laughing and crying at the same time, saying it twice for emphasis, once quietly against my mouth and once loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear, because apparently even in the biggest moment of her life, Nora Bellamy could not resist an audience. We got married the following spring, in a small venue with string lights that Nora insisted on because she said our whole relationship had started under bad restaurant lighting and deserved better on the one day it counted. Bex gave a toast that referenced the office betting pool in embarrassing detail. Callum, invited despite everything, gave a speech that somehow turned into an unprompted explanation of what a mood board was, and Nora laughed so hard through it that she had to hide her face against my shoulder. We honeymooned in the same understated way we did most things, a week in a small coastal town 2 hours from Portland, a rented cabin with a fireplace that took 3 attempts and 1 minor argument to light properly, long walks on a beach cold enough to keep the tourists away. On the last night, sitting on the porch wrapped in the same blanket, Nora turned to me with the particular look she got right before saying something she'd clearly been holding on to. "I used to think falling in love was supposed to feel like losing control," she said. "Like the ground shifting, like every romantic comedy ever made promised it would. And then you happened, and it didn't feel like losing control at all. It felt like finally being steady enough to stop bracing for something to go wrong." "That's not a very dramatic love story." "No," she agreed, smiling into the dark. "It's a better one. Sometimes people ask how we met, and I've learned to give the short version first, the one that fits in a sentence. My coworker rescued me from a bad date by pretending to be my date instead. It's the kind of story that sounds made up, the kind of thing people assume gets exaggerated in the retelling. It doesn't. If anything, the real version is stranger and better than anything I could invent, because the truth is I had spent a year and a half quietly, hopelessly interested in a woman who barely knew my coffee order, and it took one humiliating, ordinary Thursday, one bad date that never showed up, for her to finally close the distance neither of us had been brave enough to close on our own. Last month, on our second anniversary, We went back to Corvina, the same corner table, if the hostess could manage it, which she always can now. Nora wore the green dress she'd worn to our engagement dinner, her hair loose the way I like it best, and halfway through dinner, she reached across the table and took my hand, the exact same way she had that very first night, fingers lacing through mine, thumb tracing slow circles over my knuckles like she still couldn't quite believe her luck, though I'm the one who's spent 2 years believing mine. "Table for two," she said, smiling, like it was still a secret code only the two of us understood. "Table for two," I agreed. "For as long as you'll have me." "That's going to be a very long time, Dean Foster. I hope you're prepared. I've had 2 years of practice. I think I'm finally starting to catch up to you." "Finally," she said, laughing, squeezing my hand the way she had that very first night. "Only took you long enough." I am. I have been since the exact second a hand slid into mine on a sidewalk outside a restaurant, and a woman I barely knew decided, for reasons neither of us fully understood at the time, that I was worth walking through that door with. What would you have done if a coworker took your hand outside a restaurant and told the hostess you were her date, right after you'd been stood up by someone else entirely? Have you ever had a stranger, or someone you barely knew, show up exactly when you needed rescuing, and turn out to be the person you needed all along? The kind of person you couldn't have predicted from a single sidewalk moment, but couldn't imagine your life without now? Tell me your story in the comments below. And for those who'd like to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter exclusive stories every week with no ads. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.